Hey guys, Guggen here. Today we're doing a review of Elden Ring. I've never done a review before, and while I'm likely biased toward the game, I've also got opinions from a friend who disliked the game, so that I'm covering both sides of the story. For this review, I won't be using the traditional 1 to 10 scale or a buy it or don't buy it. I don't really care if you buy the game or not. I will have links below where you can buy the game, but I'm not affiliated with From Software or Sony or any of the companies selling the game in any way, and I gain nothing if you click those links. This is going to be my thoughts on the game and whether or not I felt it was worth the money, whether or not I would have paid more, or wish I'd paid less for the experience the game offered. All that out of the way, let's roll the intro and get right into this. Alright, since this is a Souls game at heart, we'll start with the gameplay, which in my opinion is the bread and butter of a Souls game. And it can mean the difference between an okay Souls game, such as Dark Souls 2, or a great Souls game, a la Dark Souls 3. Elden Ring's gameplay, in the broadest terms, is fine. It successfully manages to bring Souls combat style into the open world, which is a feat unto itself, considering in previous games, the more linear style allowed for a lot more control over encounters compared to the dynamics that an open world allows. They've also added several features to make the game more accessible and the bosses more manageable for new players and veterans alike. The new physics flask, for example, is a quantity 1 refillable flask that you can customize to do any two of a variety of effects, such as increasing stamina for a duration, or increasing magic damage for a duration, or even absorbing an attack in its entirety. We also now have summonable spirits. These do not increase boss HP like traditional summons, but can make most boss fights much less frustrating by taking some of the focus off of you so you can heal or prepare for big attacks. Or you can use one that just sits in the back and shoots at the boss for some extra DPS. In addition, they've also made it possible to change your weapon skills and affinity at any blacksmith or grace site once you pick up certain items. This, as an example, allows you to have a weapon skill which normally has a dexterity affinity, such as sword stance, but also have the weapon deal magic damage or holy damage or bleed damage with the scaling that normally would come with those affinities. This is helpful for tailoring your character to deal with individual boss weaknesses. Regarding the open world itself, by nature, it lends itself to some benefits and drawbacks. One benefit, for example, is that if you find yourself fighting an enemy you cannot win against, you can bypass it and come back later. With very few true barriers to progress, in most cases even the most obvious progression blocks can be bypassed by exploring and looking for an alternative route. As a trade-off though, these paths are usually more dangerous and difficult than the main pathway. Another advantage to an open world is that players who explore every nook and cranny and get lucky, or veterans who know where to go, can go out of their way to upgrade their weaponry to endgame levels before fighting any bosses, just by going and getting the materials. One drawback, in my opinion, is the overuse of the copy-paste function. The vast majority of the open world enemies you're going to come across are palette swaps of the same enemies you fought at the beginning of the game. And the same applies to the mini-bosses scattered in mini-dungeons. The boss you see me fighting here, for example, shows up in 3 of the first 5 catacomb-style dungeons I went into to gather footage for this review. I didn't specifically hunt these dungeons down, I just went to the closest 5 I could remember the locations of off the top of my head. And while the fights do vary a little between them, you're likely to get tired of fighting the same dungeon bosses over and over again by the time you reach endgame. Even a few of the main bosses get this treatment, with reskins or upgraded versions of them showing up either later in the story or inside dungeons. In one case, you fight the same boss 3 times in total. 2 of said encounters are exactly the same, with no mechanical changes or difficulty upgrades between them. The second big drawback with open world, and the one that's likely to be more of a problem for new players in general, both new to the series as well as series veterans new to this game, is the fact that guides are almost a necessity. The open world means gear, spells, and abilities are scattered to the 4 winds. Almost every unique enemy or boss will drop something useful, which sounds great until you're the brand new astrologer who's struggling to survive or make your way even through the first dungeon you're likely to come across without running out of resources and no real idea of where to go or how to get upgrades, useful spells, or useful gear. Yes, you can explore every nook and cranny of the game, and I'm aware some people enjoy doing just that. But even with that, you're likely to miss things or accidentally cut off quests that may be required to get some spell or ability or piece of gear, and all the while you're going to be frustrated and irritated with the gameplay because you're burning all your FP just trying to take down standard enemies at a reasonable speed, while leaving nothing for unique enemies or bosses when you finally do reach them. For some builds, this is less of an issue. For example, my first character was a samurai, which has decent starting gear and stats, and what you start with can stay relevant well into mid-game or even late game. But picking the astrologer, you start with a weapon that's next to useless unless it's upgraded with materials you can't even find until mid or late game. And the abilities for casters, when you do find them, are considerably higher stat requirements than their melee equivalents, which effectively locks out many useful abilities until late or end game. There is gear and useful spells available early on, but if you don't know where it is or how to get to it, you can spend many hours struggling to survive until something better comes around. Personally, I'm not fond of the open world idea. I very much prefer a more linear game where you're not wandering around randomly trying to figure out what you should do or where to go next. However, that's a minor gripe. The world is beautiful, the separate zones are unique and interesting, and the passion that went into creating them was obvious at a glance. Even the ever-present poison swamps are much less irritating this time around due to the fact that by riding Torrent, you can bypass the usual poison effect with a few exceptions. Boss design, when not being repeated over and over again, is excellent. They're interesting and varied and a reasonable challenge. However, difficulty is going to depend on your skill and the restrictions you place on yourself. If you decide to go into solo pure melee or caster with set skills and refuse to use summons, ashes, you're going to have a harder time. The game made it easier to change these skills and abilities and stats around for a reason, so you could tailor yourself to a boss as needed. By playing flexibly, you can give yourself major advantages. That's not to say you cannot succeed while restricting yourself, but you will need to raise your skill level or stats to compensate for the disadvantage you'll be at from time to time. On the performance side, I played on PS5 and the game ran great. There were graphical pop-ins from time to time, especially when covering large distances on horseback, but aside from some unregistered commands such as not dismounting when you try to or refusing to mount even when it's supposedly possible, I had next to zero issues. On PC, there are definitely issues. Whether or not they stem from the anti-cheat software or the way the game loads areas, I'm not entirely certain. I'm not really a programmer. For all I know, it could be both. But it is definitely a problem, especially if you're in combat and the game freezes up, which is almost guarantees a death. All in all, I'm glad I bought and played the game, even at full retail price, though I probably wouldn't want to pay more for it. Anyway, thank you for watching. These are my thoughts on Elden Ring. I hope they help some of you make a choice on whether or not to buy the game. If anyone has any other thoughts on the game or thoughts on future videos you'd like me to make, please comment below. But again, I ask that you keep the comments spoiler-free. Guggen out.